When Steven Tyler was 77 in 2025, an unexpected event occurred at his Rock Hall induction. Fans were shocked to see him without his customary performance makeup on television. Even devoted followers were taken aback by the deep lines that covered his forehead. The most unsettling aspect, however, wasn't that. New images reveal a completely different picture. According to physicians, his trembling hands are related to his turbulent background. The man who used to scream for hours on stage is now hardly able to whisper. You won't believe what actually happened to the rock star's face. The Stuyvesant Polyclinic Hospital in Manhattan, which had housed generations of New Yorkers before shutting in 1978, was the birthplace of Stephen Victor Tallarico on March 26, 1948. Victor, his father, taught music in high school and had classical training as a pianist. Susan, his mother, stayed at home and proudly embraced her Polish heritage. There were always piano notes and rigid restrictions in their flat. Although Stephen was raised in a noisy environment, he also felt that his family wanted him to fit into a limited space. The only thing that remained warm and vibrant was music. However, he also secretly disagreed with it because he desired independence and his parents want discipline. That tension was ingrained in him long before he even took the stage. In the hopes that things might improve, his family relocated to the Bronx when he was 3 years old. Rather, his confidence was shattered by the local children. He walked strangely, had curly hair, and was thin. Bronx youths of the 1950s didn't let that go unpunished. They pushed him away from them, shoved him, and made fun of him. Every day of school was painful. He defended himself by acting out, and soon he was confronting teachers just as much as bullies. His father's rigorous practice standards made Stephen feel as though he could only breathe when he snuck outdoors, so home wasn't the solace he sought either. By the time he was 6 years old, he had discovered a peculiar type of tranquility in neighborhood parks where doo-wop groups performed under streetlights. As he listened, he visualized himself in front of people who genuinely wanted to hear him. When Stephen was 9 years old in 1957, the family relocated to Northeast Yonkers, this time to 100 Pembroke Drive. The bustle of the metropolis gave way to a softer hum of the suburbs. But Stephen's thoughts just grew louder. When he was 8, he learned to play drums and made a kit out of cardboard boxes and pots. He would sneak Elvis Presley albums into his room at night and mimic every gesture, shaking, and yell in the hopes that no one would catch him. In the living room, Stephen spun an Elvis as his father played Beethoven. The performer he would become, someone who could shout, snarl, whisper, and soar all in one song, was born out of that silent struggle between classical and rock. Stephen discovered a secret no child ever forgets at the age of 10. In the 1920s, his grandfather was a bootlegger who ran illicit alcoholic beverages and eluded the law. Stephen adored it. He felt as though he was born to insurrection. Something clicked in his head when he realized that someone in his own family had once broken the law. He might be able to break the mold if his grandpa did. Stories turned into fuel. They were like a badge to him, and he eventually harnessed that same wild attitude to push his music to new heights. He was affected hard and early by asthma. Days passed while he was confined within, unable to breathe and hearing his own lungs fail him. He lay in bed and imagined crowds and bright lights while other children rushed outdoors. He was imprisoned by every attack, yet released by every daydream. In his dreams, he was bigger, louder, and untouchable. The showman he became was influenced by those lonely hours. There was more to his leaps and cries on stage than just show. They were paths of escape constructed during childhood illness. He learned to transform weakness into a form of fire, yet the asthma persisted. At the age of 14, Stephen channeled all of that pent-up enthusiasm into a band called The Strangers by 1962. Stephen started out as the drummer for Chain Reaction, which they shortly changed to. He let out a scream that sounded exactly like Little Richard during an untidy garage jam session in 1964. The band shoved him to the front after giving him a startled glance. That was the turning point. He was opening for the Beach Boys and the Byrds at the age of 16. Long before it became his signature, he covered himself with scarves and wore platform shoes. Teachers weren't fond of it. He was suspended due to his inappropriate actions. Stephen was unconcerned. Each defiant stride brought him closer to the great goal he was pursuing. After being expelled from Roosevelt High School for using marijuana in 1966, he enrolled in Manhattan's Quintano School for Young Professionals. He created leather products by hand and buskied on the streets to pay for it. His life became into a blend of hustle, music, and late-night parties where drugs were readily available and even simpler to use. Stephen had already opted for the loud route, despite his father's desire for him to pursue classical music. Quintano introduced him to the fervent spirit of the counterculture of the 1960s, which permeated his work, attitude, and voice. When he visited a New Hampshire ski resort a year later in 1967, he met Tom Hamilton. They jammed all night long and became friends over Jimi Hendrix. It was unknown at the time, but that session served as Aerosmith's initial spark. Although Stephen was well known in the local clubs, he was lacking something until he met Hamilton. They had an immediate, vibrant, and hungry chemistry. It was like the beginning of something that would rock the walls. The draft for the Vietnam War hung over all young men by 1968. Stephen hid in band vans, sneaked into anti-war demonstrations, avoided police, and just avoided being arrested. When his system attempted to confine him, he refused to accept it. A few of his pals were drafted and never returned. Because he was outside the bounds of acceptable behavior due to his drug usage and rebellious nature, Stephen avoided it. His resistance to submit, bend, or break was formed by that period and carried into Aerosmith. He started performing with Chain Reaction in Boston clubs by 1969. The audience was surprised and occasionally on the verge of rioting when the mob went shirtless and plunged into disorder. Despite the continual arguments amongst his bandmates, the audience was unable to turn away. His training ground was the Boston scene, where he developed the wild force that would eventually blow up stadia. Then came the 31st of July, 1970. Aerosmith began when Steven Tyler joined Joe Perry, Ray Tabino, Joey Kramer, and Tom Hamilton in Boston's Fenway area. The name was inspired by a comic that Stephen had read in a dream he had while high during rehearsal. They slept wherever they could and lived on instant noodles while practicing in cramped apartments and basements. Everywhere he looked, Stephen faced rejection, but he persisted in his vision. On November 6, 1970, at Nipmuc Regional High School in Upton, Massachusetts, they performed their debut live performance. There were only 200 or so children. After performing Mama Kin, Stephen destroyed Joey Kramer's drum kit because they were only paid $50. Before the police intervened, the altercation spread into the parking lot. But news got out. A band that crazy was difficult to forget. Danny Goldberg noticed their wild performance at Lenny's on the Turnpike and signed them to Columbia Records for around $125,000 in June 1972. The air was smoky. As if he controlled the universe, Stephen stood in the center of the boisterous gathering. Aerosmith eventually had a chance after Columbia took a chance. The first two trips in 1971 and 1972 were difficult. They had very little money and a colorful painted van with no beds or restroom. They subsisted on inexpensive food and showered at truck stops. On one occasion, Stephen even puked on stage due to terrible hot dogs. However, the band continued despite the roaring audience. They built their narrative from the ground up, turning the van into a moving home full of stress, laughter, and perspiration. By the end of 1972, Stephen and Joe Perry were at odds over power and lyrics. Before they traveled to Sunipe, New Hampshire, they were on the verge of breaking up. After drinking, having a good time, and making a vow to rise together, they returned together. They quickly replaced Ray Tabano with Brad Whitford after dismissing him for being unreliable. The band was concerned that Stephen had already strayed into drugs, but Whitford's steady presence kept them on task. At Boston's Intermedia Studios, they recorded their debut album from late 1972 to early 1973. The band was charmed by Stephen's raw vocals on Mama Kin, but the label was afraid. Every erratic cry was preserved. In January 1973, the album was released. Initially modest, it raised their flag. All of this, the fighting, the chaos, the hunger, the dreams, formed the sound that would propel Aerosmith from the basement to the pinnacle of rock history. In 1974, Steven Tyler entered the New York recording studio with a youthful voice and an older-than-life ambition. There was not much time left for the band to finish Get Your Wings. Lord of the Thighs was the final target, and Jack Douglas gave Tyler the hardest shove he had ever received. Tyler spent 12 hours in a row overdubbing harmonies, repeatedly stacking his voice until it seemed like something was rupturing inside of him. He had blood running down his throat by the end of the evening. But they needed that last sound, so he continued. Aerosmith's sound was profoundly altered by those rich bluesy layers. Their first significant step towards stardom was the album. However, it was also the first indication that Tyler's body might not survive rock and roll. Since 1969, when it was just a piano demo he played for himself, Drayamon had been a part of Tyler's world. It didn't take off until 1975, when a re-release propelled it to number 6. All radio stations now wanted a piece of it. But there were problems with that attentiveness. The stations in Boston were unable to deal with Tyler's language when he conducted candid interviews. Before being banned by a few stations, he called censors prudes and made fun of their regulations. The bans just increased the song's popularity. Tyler appeared to be destined for revolt, and Dream On became the song that made Aerosmith unavoidable. Aerosmith was already going crazy when the California Jam came up in 1975. Tyler sensed the excitement of the Ontario Motor Speedway as 250,000 people stood in front of them. He sprang 20 feet into the air as if he couldn't fall, rushed across the stage, and scaled the drone riser. His heel snapped as he struck the ground incorrectly. But he continued to sing. Pain was unimportant. Cameras continued to roll. The screams became louder. Talk of raucous parties made backstage tales even more bizarre. However, the actual jump remains in the past. It demonstrated just how far Tyler would go for the sake of the audience. Later in the year, toys were added to the attic. And Tyler and Joe Perry cobbled together a 20-minute riff like lightning to create and Walk This Way. Tyler had no paper and little patience, so he scrawled the lyrics on the stairway walls of the record plant. He continued to snort cocaine from the mixing board to keep awake amidst the confusion. Years later, Jack Douglas acknowledged that the studio turned into a place where nobody slept and everyone strove to find an edge. These behaviors were risky, but the outcome permanently altered music. Rock, rap, and other genres were impacted by Walk This Way. Additionally, the record catapulted Aerosmith into the public eye. Detroit got the unexpected show in 1976. On stage, Tyler asked a girl he saw in the crowd to marry him. The audience yelled for the show, but chaos broke out backstage. Fans remarked that it appeared to be a battle straight out of a movie when his girlfriend, B.B. Buell, rushed the stage and accosted him. It garnered widespread attention. Even though Aerosmith had a reputation for being troubled, this incident demonstrated how complicated Tyler's private life had gotten. When Rocks arrived in 1976, they thrashed back in the saddle with a crisp whip crack. It wasn't an easy sound, though. They first experimented with an actual bullship. It failed. It was more painful than beneficial. They snapped a cap pistol and spun a 30-foot cable to get the crack after hours of failure. The band was struggling, yet the album peaked at number 3. At performances, Tyler's voice slurred. Fans were perplexed and occasionally upset. Drugs were becoming so prevalent that even success was unable to conceal them. The Rolling Stones tour of 1977 followed. Tyler belted out Brown Sugar in Baton Rouge while standing close to MC Jagger, as if the stage were theirs. The press adored it. However, Tyler shared narcotics with Jagger behind closed doors and almost overdosed on heroin. He was glowing in the lights for a time. The next he was backstage, fading out. It was an indication of the future. By 1977, Tyler had injected heroin and fainted in the studio during the Draw the Line recordings. For weeks, they were unable to record. About $200,000 was spent on the delays. His addiction dominated the room despite producers' best efforts to encourage him to sing honestly. It was whispered that the band might not even make it. Then, in 1979, an odd event put an end to it for a while. Backstage in West Hollywood, Joe Perry's wife, Alyssa, showered Terry, the wife of Tom Hamilton, with milk. The battle quickly erupted after Tyler lost his temper and attacked Perry. Perry quit after a few hours. The group disintegrated. That one moment had been the culmination of years of chaos, drugs, and ego. Tyler overdosed on methadone on July 9, a year later, in Portland, Maine. He required CPR after collapsing into the drum set in the middle of the performance and was taken to the hospital. The band was forced to postpone a whole tour. It was the most obvious indication yet that something needed to happen, but it wasn't simple. Jimmy Crespo took Perry's place after his departure and contributed to the creation of Rock in a Hard Place in 1982. Tyler hardly appeared. When he did, his voice was flat and worn out from being high on Percoet. At number 37, the album reached its lowest position since its release. It sounded like a band breaking up, according to critics. They were correct. Finally, the band attempted to save him in 1983. They met Tyler at Café La Fortuna and pleaded with him to get to treatment. He nodded. At Hazelden, he spent 30 days. He experienced hallucinations and agony from detox. Though he was still cut off from the group, he emerged more clearly. It was difficult to heal the wounds from the past. He took another overdose a year later. Vodka and Valium in a motel room. He was brought back to life by paramedics. He attended his first AA meeting because of this concern. Although the road remained hard, it was a step. When discussions regarding Perry's comeback started in 1985, things nearly turned around. Then, during rehearsals, Tyler had another relapse. After the reunion broke up, Tyler started working on little projects, such as a 1986 cameo at Rogue's Gallery. He needed to reshoot his mumbled lines. It seemed like the years were lost. Tyler also had a complicated personal life during these years. He had a brief relationship with Baby Buell. In 1976. On July 1, 1977, she gave birth daughter Liv Tyler after becoming pregnant. She chose Todd Rundgren as the father since she was afraid of Tyler's way of life. It wasn't until 1991 that a DNA test showed the whole truth to Liv. Her age was 14. Despite the intense shock, she and her biological father soon became close. On September 1, 1978, Tyler also made Serinda Fox his wife. Mia, their daughter, was born on December 22, 1978. Due to drug use, extramarital encounters, and frequent travel, the marriage broke down. 1987 saw their divorce. In the years that followed, Serinda suffered and died in 2002. Growing up, Mia remembered a father who was never present. The most troubling aspect of Tyler's past occurred in 1973 when he began dating 16-year-old Julia Holcomb. He was appointed her legal guardian, and the lawsuit that surfaced decades later revealed a horrific tale of trauma, drugs, and manipulation. His errors were referred to be crimes of passion by Tyler. But something much more disturbing was witnessed by the world. In 1988, following his divorce from Serinda, he wed Teresa Barak. 1989 and 1991 saw the birth of Chelsea and Taj, their children. The marriage was strained by Tyler's addictions, and they split up in 2005 and got divorced in 2006. He became engaged to Erin Brady in 2011, who assisted him in facing some of his history. She found old love letters from the 1970s, which led to the breakup of their relationship in 2013. Tyler acknowledged that the man he had been made him feel ashamed. He first fell in love with Amy Preston, who was his assistant, years later. In 2016, they became public. Despite being 38 years younger, they became closer via their mutual struggles and recovery work. Then something occurred. Tyler cleaned up, and Aerosmith surged once again. They released Permanent Vacation in August of 1987. Dude Looks Like a Lady sold over 4 million copies and peaked at number 17. The band was everywhere all of a sudden. Tyler was hungry to take back his life, sober and creative. They became America's top hard rock band by 1989, according to Rolling Stone. Pump introduced Janie's Got a Gun to the globe in the same year. The vocals on that tune were layered over 50 times by Tyler. It won him his first Grammy and peaked at number 4. In the US, more than 7 million copies of the album were sold. Aerosmith appeared in front of about 1 million people in Moscow in 1990. The world watched as the Tyler crowd surfed and gave Soviet guards peace gestures. One of the most bizarre concerts of the time was this one. Upon its release in 1993, Get a Grip sold more than 20 million copies globally. Crying grew in size. Tyler injured 3 ribs as he leaped from a cliff during the music video production. However, he continued till the end of the shoot. There were 2 Grammys after that. The band had returned to the summit. Their Ballpark Brawl tour earned $35 million in 1994. Backstage in Detroit, Tyler had a brief relapse, but he quickly recovered and resumed his sobriety. The tour demonstrated that they were indeed returning. Pink saved 9 lives, which nearly failed when it debuted in 1997. The record sold over 6 million copies and peaked at number 1, and Tyler penned an elephant in the music video. He wrote the song as a tribute to his father, who died in 2001. Then came the world-shaking song. I Don't Want to Miss Anything, that peaked at number 1 and remained there for 4 weeks in a row in 1998. It helped the Armageddon soundtrack sell over 11 million records worldwide and sold over 1 million copies in its first month of release. Tyler's poignant performance turned it into a worldwide classic. In July 1986, Steven Tyler entered the Magic Ventures studio in New York, assuming it would be simply another session. But when he and Run DMC entered that room, things changed. Like a single heartbeat, they recorded the new version of Walk This Way while standing in the same spot. At the time, it was unusual because rock and rap hardly ever interacted. And yet they were fusing the rough edge of hip-hop with the 1975 Aerosmith classic. The remix went to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 upon its release. Aerosmith's weekly sales of albums increased from about 2,000 to over 10,000. Rap rock instantly became a major force after MTV repeatedly aired the video. Bands like Linkin Park and Limp Bizkit later stepped through the door that was open for the world that day in the studio. Steven found himself in a completely different spotlight years later. He became a judge on American Idol in 2011, and the compensation was substantial. Approximately $8 to $10 million every season. The screen was brightened up by his colorful personality. When he planted a peck on Pia Tosano's cheek, the tabloids went crazy. He claimed that the show required him to travel 250,000 miles, which exhausted him and caused him to quit after season 12. Jennifer Lopez's seasonally salary of $17.5 million, nearly twice his salary, infuriated his colleagues. Tension was also sensed by his bandmates. They thought he left Aerosmith for the TV life. Steven returned to music full-time when he departed the show and was replaced by Keith Urban. He had already made his life public long before all of that. Does the Noise in My Head Bother You? Is his 2006 autobiography. It stunned readers and came in at number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. He discussed the pandemonium of the 1970s and acknowledged that he spent $20 million on drugs. He wrote about fights, parties, rehabilitation, and the harm he inflicted without really acknowledging the suffering it caused. His revelation of a 1986 suicide attempt in which he swallowed 30 pills before being rescued by his girlfriend was the most disturbing. The book was a success because of the unvarnished nature of his stories, which demonstrated that he could captivate readers with words just as well as melodies. Though brief, his acting moments will never be forgotten. He performed as a roadie version of himself with a harmonica in Wayne's World 2 in 1993. When he appeared in Be Cool in 2005, he even ridiculed his aged appearance in the mirror. These cameos were brief glimpses of his charm and sense of humor. Whenever he appeared, he made an impression, but he never pursued acting. His attention turned to something more profound as he got older. He began Janie's Fund in 2015 after reflecting on the suffering that his song Janie's Got a Gun was about. By 2025, the charity had raised $25 million, covering 525 abused girls' 66,000 rehabilitation sessions. With operations in 12 states and Washington, D.C., it sought to assist around 4,000 girls annually. In 2021, he spent time with the girls himself and created a new facility. The project demonstrated how personal his purpose was and went on to become one of the most influential celebrity charities in youth recovery. But he was put to the test once more by life. He took a stride into Nashville with the publication of his solo album, We're All Somebody from Somewhere, in 2021. The album peaked at #1 on the top country albums chart, and he collaborated with Carrie Underwood and other artists. In its first week, it sold between 16 and 800 pure copies. Songs like Red, White, and You Felt Bold While Holding On included fragments of his unwavering perseverance. The record, which was released during a relapse scare, had the candor of a guy who has repeatedly reached the brink yet continued to move on. When he had surgery on both feet in 2009 due to severe bunions from decades of wearing tight boots and performing wild stage tricks, that edge had become apparent. It was uncommon to do both feet at once, and it was very painful. He was prescribed OxyContin by doctors, but the discomfort drove him back to addiction. Following over a decade of abstinence, he developed a prescription medication addiction and checked himself into the Betty Ford Center in December 2009. Aerosmith returned in time for the 2010 Grammys, despite having to postpone their tour. His candid discussion of the relapse served as a reminder to his supporters of the potency and potential risks of painkillers. When everything appeared to be stable, he encountered yet another crisis. He suffered a lacerated liver, a deep cut on his head that required 20 stitches, and a dislocated shoulder after crashing his motorcycle in Maui on August 5, 2011. He underwent 8 operations. However, a few weeks later, he sang a little of Dream On while wearing a sling on his arm when he took the stage at the 2011 VMAs and joked about his rock and roll bones. His determination to remain motionless demonstrated how much performing meant to him, even though the crash caused more tour cancellations. Then, in 2023, came the bombshell. On September 9, Stephen pushed too hard in the first few seconds of Aerosmith's Peace Out Farewell tour, breaking his larynx at UBS Arena. He stumbled on stage due to bleeding from the wound. He may never fully recover, according to doctors, and it took months for him to recuperate. The tour was postponed for the remainder of it. Because his voice had carried the band for over 50 years, fans were taken aback. Even the strongest singer may be vulnerable, as seen by the injury. He made every effort to get well in 2024. In Nashville and Utah, stem cell infusions gave people hope but not assurance. Physicians concluded the damage was irreversible by August. After more than 50 years of touring, Aerosmith declared their retirement. It hurt, but it was unavoidable. As they announced it, a whole period of classic rock appeared to bow its head. He continued to share music at various times after that. He made an appearance in Los Angeles at the Jam for Janie charity event in February 2025. After the injury, it was his first performance. He performed 3 songs, such as Walk This Way and Dream On. Despite his gruff voice and sore neck, the audience stood and applauded. The bruises spoke for itself, and the doctors advised him not to push himself. He still poured all of his remaining energy into the room, though. At the 2025 VMAs later that year, he sang Mama I'm Coming Home with Joe Perry as a memorial to Ozzy Osbourne. He hardly moved to shield his throat. The audience was moved by the performance and gave it another standing ovation. He was taken to the hospital right away for vocal strain after leaving the stage. Despite his limitations, the homage demonstrated his continued power and the rising expense of performing. He put considerably more money into Janie's fund after giving up touring. $10 million from tour proceeds were used to create an endowment and develop a new girls' center in Tennessee in 2025. Every year, the institution provided hundreds of girls with support, residential care, and therapy. It began to represent how he transformed his personal suffering into something therapeutic. As all of this was going on, supporters started discussing how he was becoming older. His expression at the 2025 Rock Hall induction was a focal point. Although he claimed in 2007 that he solely used eye creams, deep forehead wrinkles showed heavy Botox use during the 2010s. In the 2000s and beyond, side-by-side images sparked discussions about cosmetic surgery, heredity, and the effects of decades of driving. According to some admirers, his early usage of heroin may have contributed to his strangely youthful, smooth appearance, which eventually faded as time passed. His visage came to represent how difficult it can be for rock stars to age. His partner, Amy Preston, posted pictures of his home life on Instagram in 2025. Many fans thought that the tremors in his hands were remnants of his previous drug use. He did practically everyday yoga despite the tremors. When he first learned yoga in his 60s, it kept him strong and flexible. Images showed him jamming with pals, cooking, and smiling at events. He still had that energy, but at 77 he moved more slowly. People were reminded of the conflicts he had fought by the vibrations. However, he felt like a survivor in action because of his dedication to health. For once, his home life appeared peaceful and authentic, and the world saw the man behind the legend still alive, learning new things and clinging to whatever music remained within him.